When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Ledlow with the Fearless Mindset Podcast, and today this kicks off my first podcast of the year. I had enough podcast guests in the queue to last us for about 8 to 9 months. So had to take a little bit of a break running the business and travel around the country. Just got off a 5-month road trip and got to see my buddy Kris Coleman out there in Virginia. And thanks for coming on, Kris, and good to see you. You surviving the winter snowstorms out there?
Trying to stay warm here in DC.
I can imagine. And then we had a great time just visiting out there in Virginia, talking about old times and where he's heading and stuff. And we'll have Kris on another podcast here soon to go take a deep dive in that. And of course, we got Brittnee. And Brittnee is in Dallas, Texas, and she's working really hard. I was actually in the Dallas area, and I was looking for a barber, and I'm like, jumped in her chair, and we started talking. And she asked me what I did, and I said, yeah, I have a security company just opened office in Dallas, Texas. And then she asked me what I thought, and we got into a deep dive on the whole CEO shooting in Luigi. And then she kind of shared with me her opinion, what she's been hearing from her generation and what she sees on social media. My mind was blown away, folks. I was like, I had no idea. I had an idea, but not as significant. So Brittnee, thanks for your time. Thanks for jumping on your first podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. And so this is Brittnee's first talk on a podcast. And so she's got a good voice for radio as it is. And so you guys can hear that. So Brittnee, going back to that barber chair, I'm sitting there, we're talking, and you said a few key things that kind of struck my core on the mentality of this generation. And what are you hearing from all walks of life?
I mean, basically, it's just we're tired, like we feel like we are working harder with no incentives, like I do hair. I talk to people all day, parents. I think like Gen Z goes from 27 down to all the way to 11. Parents talk about their kids not wanting to grow up. Kids in my chair talk about not wanting to grow up. And I think it all goes back to just how chaotic everything's been. And that kind of leads into the shooting, like these kids, like our generation's like being labeled with no empathy and we don't care and we're desensitized and all of that. And I don't think it's that. I think it's just we're in survival mode.
Wow. So survival mode means they kind of given up hope. For that house with a white picket fence, having a home, having a family. Yeah. Why have they given up hope? What do you hear?
I mean, we talk about inflation. Like whenever I first started renting my first apartment, it was $400. Now you go rent that same apartment, it's going to be $1,200 in the ghetto, and it's a piece of crap, But we talk about groceries. A lot of us are having to move in with our parents. We're having to move in with roommates. We're having to move in with other families. Like we talk about not being able to afford insurance. Our mental health is horrible and we want to go get help, but we can't afford it. You're working 40 plus hours a week, 2-3 jobs a week, and it's still not enough.
So everybody's kind of drowning.
Yeah. You're just running in a circle, trying to stay afloat, while everything else raises and you're just there. So I think that's why we kind of look at these corporations and we see how much these CEOs are making off of us. And we're like, how can we feel bad for you? Like how do you expect that empathy when we've got kids that are being shot every day at school? Like parents are scared, kids are scared, like these these kids talk about school shootings like it's normal. And that it's a major difference for me. I can tell because I'm 26. I'm a little bit older. And then my younger brother's, 25. So 24, 25. So, it's like I can see there's a huge difference in the way that I think compared to the way that he thinks. And something happened in those 2 years where it's different. They lost a lot more hope.
And you're sharing with me too, when you're cutting my hair and everything, that the generation thinks he's a modern day superhero. Luigi is his name, right? He's considered like a superhero kind of thing.
Kind of like an adventure. Like they call him the Robin Hood. Wow. He's the Robin Hood of our generation, pretty much, because it's like you go and take from the rich and then you give it back to the poor. It's like we feel like obviously that wasn't the way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But it was a good start for a revolution because that's what my generation, that's what we want. We want reform. We want to live and be comfortable and have a balanced life.
Wow. So is this mainly social media pushing this, or is this how that's how the thought process of the generation? It has nothing to do with social media.
I think it's a mix. Okay. I honestly do. I think social media probably has ignited a fire, but I think there's a reason why everybody is on the same page.
No, not to get political, but what's the opinion? Trump just won by a landslide. There was nothing to contest, nothing to legislate, anything. It was like popular vote too. What are you hearing from your generation on Trump's new presidency? Is that impacting anything?
Mixed reviews. Yeah, okay. I definitely. I think more so from my generation that we're not so worried about the political stuff as we are just finding a common ground so we can all have a solid, balanced life. Like that's what I talk to with my clients, my friends. When we talk, that's the same way, like we don't really care about the political stuff. We just want
to live
peace. Yeah. We just want to be able to coexist and just, be able to have fun and work and not just stress all the time about.
You're telling me most of the 20 below the 30 age group, their ages are lived in the now. They're living in the now moment. They're living for now.
And that's why I think that we're living in survival mode because it's like we're literally taking it a day at a time, a year at a time. Ever since COVID, it's just gone from like crazy to crazier, and I think we're just emotionally done. I think so.
So has his popularity continued to rise after this because it's subsided now, or is it a movement that he's created?
I think so. I think it went from a movement to idolization.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But I will say, I think that's just because of the contrast between what mainstream media is pushing and then what the voice of the people are saying. So I think because mainstream media was trying to, he's terrible, like y'all should have the generation pushed harder for no, he's a hero. Okay. I kind of like a rebel thing, like a rebellion thing. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Folks, you heard that from the generation itself.
Maybe.
I'm not saying you're representing them, but that's what you're hearing from your occupation.
From a lot of people. Yeah. Okay. This means a lot to me because I do want to build a better life for me and my children,
Wow. That's a lot to take in, folks. That's reality, the world we live in. So now, Brittnee, I'm going to bring in Kris. my subject matter expert, former CIA, done some law enforcement stuff. And Kris, what do we do? What do we do, brother? What do we do?
Well, it's I hear you, Brittnee. I think the generation that is yours and the prior one too. I mean, even this is not like Gen Z's woken up and this is brand new, right? So this has been an evolution of challenges that have come over a series of generations, and the next one is going to be different as well. But I think there's a bunch of data points here, a bunch of valid data points. You're hearing it on a day-to-day basis in your occupation and the people you talk to. We're seeing it in social media. Not that that's a valid, necessarily, factual-based platform, but people are voicing their concerns there. And we're also seeing it, I think, in the reaction from corporations. And what does this mean, right? Because it's not just healthcare. It's not just insurance. But there are other industries where this is applicable. And I think there's the element of the Robin Hood, right, and the villain, and I think that makes sense. And I looked at some data before this show, and I think to almost a quarter of Gen Z feels depressed and feels anxious, and I think that was a Gallup survey that was done a couple of years ago, and now you've got, and that was post COVID, right? So you mentioned that post COVID it's gotten worse. Your comments about giving up hope, that's a data point. And some of your folks that you talk with, they just did another survey with Generation Lab, and it said 81% of the students they polled, they side with the killer, well, the alleged killer, I should say. And that is, again, another data point for what Brittnee's brought up. As an industry, as an EP industry, we've got to address this. But corporations have to address this, and they've got to address it from a security perspective. Now, am I in a subject matter expert position to say that they should be doing differently with their profits and changing the way they provide services? I think that's up to them, and that is something that they need to take a look at. Like, there is a societal impact on how they carry out their business, and different corporations handle things differently, right? So do they ensure the profits of their shareholders, or do they ensure the value goes to their customers, or what is their mission as a corporation? And as an example of Red 5, we do 12 months of giving. We do a lot of philanthropic giving back. Like, we engage with the community on that, and it's important for us. And from a provision of value, that's what we strive to do every day, is provide excellence. Now, we're not in this industry that creates this anxiety. This is the healthcare, this is real estate, this is insurance, this is all of those industries, at least from my perspective, that take on revenues, generate a profit, they expend some costs, but I think on the back end of that, the value of what's perceived by Gen Z and some of their customers is not that great. Like, insurance is a tough environment to be in. There's this element of, I'm going to pay you now so that you'll pay me later if something bad happens to me. That's all driven by probability, right? That's all driven by almost happenstance. Yes, there are numbers and there are probabilities that drive that, actuarial tables that drive that, but the perception that there's no value from the general population, or from Gen Z, or from other populations, that they're not getting anything of value from this, and the CEOs are getting extremely wealthy on the profits when they decide not to pay out or not to take care of the value that's supposed to be providing the industry or their customer base, I think is critical. And that's what they're going to have to find a way around, right? They've got to deal with that issue. Now, societally, how we deal with Gen Z, I don't want to say getting over this, because it's not something you get over, but Gen Z's got to make a change too, right? So find a way to be more resilient. And I think that's a really key piece of this. And living day to day, I admire that. I wish I could do that more. And that's just not where I came up. Gen X, we had our own anxieties. We had our own way of growing up, a lot of risk, a lot of challenges, and we're different. But I think we found a way to overcome that over the years and to evolve and to become more resilient as a generation. And Gen Z will do the same thing, just like the millennials have done the same thing. Doesn't make anything that's happened good, right, or otherwise, okay. But both entities have to change. And this concern is going to be persistent in the industry for those those kinds of corporations we talked about.
Wow. That was a good business perspective, Kris. Thank you for that. Brittnee, any thoughts after you heard Kris?
No, I completely agree with him, and I definitely want to say, and because I'm proud to be Gen Z.
Sure.
I will say I think we're finding our way and finding our voice, because I know once they took TikTok, with the meta stocks just started going down. So we're gonna make a change. We're gonna figure it out.
Would you say TikTok is probably the biggest platform this is all on right now?
Yes,
TikTok
and we really like it because we feel like we get genuine information from it. Some good, some bad, but we like
more factual information your generation sees from TikTok versus all the others.
Yeah, our generation, like my generation, prefers that over mainstream media.
No way.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that, Kris? That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own opinions on mainstream media, and I have very strong opinions on TikTok. But I mean, from my perspective, and what I've always talked about, what I put in the book, Mark, Raise Your Resiliency, was you've got to find trustworthy channels of news.
Yes.
Right. Where do you get your information? And some people, find their way on Facebook or TikTok or whatever the platform is. Now it's X, right? Or people are still going to the alternative channels that are out there. And I think I'm okay with where you go get it, as long as you're validating it. Like, I can't control how you corroborate your information, Brittnee. Like, you may go to TikTok and find 6 different providers, and 4 of the 6 say something that makes sense, and you sort of corroborate the information, but the other 2 are a little wacky, right? So you're not going to listen to those 2.
Right.
As long as the individual, the organization, is validating the streams and corroborating the information, there can be value in each of those. I'm not saying one is better than the other. Mainstream media has its purpose, right? There's some utilization there in the broader streams. It's not the way necessarily I get my news either.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to TikTok, but I've got my own security reasons where I'm never going to go on TikTok.
Right.
And so I think there's elements here of, where do you get your information? How are you validating, corroborating that information? And are you basing massive, like, big life decisions on that? Or is it more like, hey, this is what I learned about this topic today? And I think there's other pieces of that. Like, so we get into resiliency of your life, Brittnee, or how you want your generation to evolve. Your generation, just like millennials, just like Gen X, just like boomers, have to find that way of getting the best information you can to make really good decisions.
I completely agree.
And it's tough. It's tough in this world of mis and disinformation.
Because misinformation is everywhere, literally everywhere.
Yeah, but the only way you get control back is by validating the information you're seeing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And sitting back and passively consuming social media, as an example, is a disaster, right? Because you're not questioning what you're reading. And that's what I hear for you're doing, is like, I'm going to go ask and find out if this is a good source. And we go to this other one and ask and see if there's a good source, and validate it and compare. And that's what you have to do. Yeah,
for sure. And I think because, especially like when, what election was it? Was it Trump and Biden? That's when I noticed my generation really started trying to find where we could find reliable information. And that's why we all kind of collectively were like, wait, mainstream media is not the way to do it. So I think we all kind of struggle of finding a good place, and finding a place to go fact check also, because sometimes you don't know if the fact check is a good place. So then you got to go fact check the fact check.
Right. And my thinking of fact checking is there's someone on the ground who can go ask questions and figure out exactly what happened and talk to eyewitnesses. I mean, this goes all the way back to the FBI version, right? Or the CIA version. Let's go get intelligence based on what happened at the site and then use that information to figure out what decisions we need to make. And that's not terribly different than what you're just saying. Like, how do we find out the best information? Fact checking is a way, as long as it's apolitical and it's not biased one way or the other. My version is get somebody boots on the ground that can tell me actually what happened.
Right.
So, yeah, this is a crazy environment, and these threats aren't going away. I mean, insurance, healthcare, banks, pharma, real estate, retail, they've all got this challenge, and it's not going away.
And Kris, from a brand reputation standpoint, from the C-suite and all these corporations, entities, they got to protect themselves from this happening again. And I at the IPSB conference in Nashville, talked to a certain individual, said they landed, I'm not going to say names or anything like that, just for the privacy of that conversation. But one firm did $30 million in contracts in 1 week, just in security services.
Sure.
And what is your thought process and advice to the C-suite out there that are like, oh, first quarter, we got to reevaluate this and figure out how to protect our shareholders, our brand, our stock valuation, and our C-suite level traveling around the world?
Yeah, no, it's something we've been obviously approached quite a bit in the last 6 weeks. We've been getting calls since the day of, and our approach has been very specifically that you can throw EP at it, and it's a stopgap, right? You need to throw executive protections at it and protect the executives. It might be a CEO, it might be a head of R&D, it might be the appropriate leadership. But we also all know in our industry that this is not sustainable.
No,
you can't just throw bodies, and that's not the right way to say it. You can't just apply executive protection agents to a problem and think it's going to be fine. It's not sustainable without a protective intelligence or a threat management program. A lot of egos, executive egos are going to demand, like, no, we need agents to stick around, and I'm the CEO, and I'll need a black Suburban with men and women to follow me around and protect me. And I get that. But the knee-jerk deployments, they occur after every tragedy. Going back decades, right? We saw this at Secret Service after Kennedy, after Reagan. We saw this at FBI and CIA after security incidents there, where there was a knee-jerk reaction, deploy a bunch of resources. But in the private sector, those kinds of reactions don't stay, right? Because it's all about the dollars. In the government, you just deploy their assets, and it's really not about the dollars, because executive protection by itself is a cost center. It's not really an enabler, and typically not set up as a profit center, right, or an enabler of CEO productivity. But within 2 quarters, unless an EP program has an assessment, but ideally by a third party, unless the EP program has a threat management program, and they're doing solid advanced work, within 2 quarters, the CFO is going to be like, why are we still doing this?
Absolutely.
Right. And the CEO may be like, I'm tired of these people being in my life and being so intrusively around me, and I can't stand it. And so, Brittnee, you can see that there's a big apparatus around a lot of this. And that's, again, it's not making anything that happens right or wrong, but we will have this surge, and only some percentage of the work is going to stay after 180 days.
Right.
If the EP companies want the programs to persist, they got to require these assessments and this protective intelligence program. So they got to start with that. So I see protective intelligence programs and intelligence analysis managed services being persistent beyond the knee-jerk EP reactions, because that intelligence program actually informs whether or not you need EP.
Exactly. Right.
And the EP teams need to team up with the protective intelligence team so that they can always have someone saying that they're needed, like the threat is justified to protect these people. And that's really the challenge, right? So you need assessments done. You need solid advanced work to be done on every trip. You're going to need a threat management program that actually drives this and assesses the threat. Ideally, you're, as an EP provider, you're helping make the justification on a regular basis that, your team is enabling an executive's productivity. You're reducing distractions, you're enabling success in order to not be just a cost center, but something that enables productivity. Otherwise, you're just, as an EP provider, you're just chasing the next project. And we've known and lived that now in Red 5 for years, but they've got to do more to address the issue that is really creating this revolutionary thought process. There's a lot that can be done around state shareholders. There's a ton that can be done around providing proper value for the revenues you're generating, giving the service for what's actually being paid for. I think that's the core, Brittnee, of what you're talking about, right? You're paying these insurance premiums, you're paying these high rents, you're paying all these different things that are out there.
You're paying so much with very little in return.
Yeah. And for a generation that lives in the moment and doesn't maybe think more proactively and more, thoughtfully about planning for the future, like the boomers did and Gen X did, that's really, really hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It is hard. And it like for me, I'm a mom, so I have to think about the future, so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do if we don't get control of this? What is my kid going to do? If we don't figure it out, we have to.
Hey, Brittnee, question for you. What do you, after that shooting went down, what were you hearing from your clients or executives and companies? Were they kind of freaking out, reacting in fear, obviously? What discussions?
I will say everybody around here is pretty hush-hush about political stuff, but you can tell I will say, I think it's kind of created like a rift in the classes right now in a way.
Okay.
So, because you don't know what people are thinking or feeling, and as somebody was murdered, over this. So you just never know. And I think everybody's just kind of trying to stay away from that.
They're staying apolitical, basically.
Yeah.
Got it. I know you said you had several executives that had talked to you about it, saying, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" We're kind of
no. I have had a few of them. One in particular, he hired somebody to protect him, and just keeping a low profile, and for him, he understands because we talk. He's been a client for a while, so we have a personal relationship. So
absolutely.
It's cool. So he understands, but he also is a businessman and has to protect himself. And and we talk about how there's ways around and we could solve it and come up with compromises and solutions. We just got to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Kris, what are your thoughts? You brought up some great points about, this is going to be dealt with in, 3 months. It's going to be like, okay, nothing's happened. The CFO is going to be like, okay, we really don't need executive protection. For the audience listening, that is basically, if you can imagine, Secret Service for the private sector, for the corporate entities out there. That's kind of what executive protection. If that was a bad definition, Kris, feel free to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, it means executive protection. It's been around as long as there's been people to protect. So it goes back as long as humankind has been around. And I think the industry, and Mark, you and I have talked about this. I've talked about this with other colleagues in the industry. It's got to evolve too, right? Mm-hmm. So we need the industry to evolve. Again, there's a couple elements. There's the corporations that do the work and have executives that need to protect it, and then there's the EP agents that do the work. And so for the corporations, the boards, right, and the founders are going to start demanding that they're doing something to actually manage the threats. And that may, Brittnee, be a point. Like, you need to actually address this public relations. You need to actually do better in the value you provide. But then that's not going to take care of all the risks and all the threats, right? So there's always going to be somebody out there that's like beyond the reasonable, and they're going to act on that irrationality. And so that means the board and the founders have to make a decision and force the company to do some threat management and deal with the threats. So this isn't just a static file in HR that collects, nasty emails. Like, that's not a threat management program. And corporations are waking up, and those are the kinds of phone calls we're getting. It's like, we have no program. We need to build a program. We are aware of threats, and the board knows that they're aware of the threats. And so now that there's knowledge, like, you can't have this tragedy happen in the corporate world. So it needs to be a real threat management program: collection, assessment, investigation, monitoring, resolution. And it needs to be reporting accountability. And a lot of times that's an expensive apparatus to build inside a corporation, but it's a whole lot cheaper than, a 30-person detail working 24/7, running around the world. And it's a lot more proactive. And frankly, it's a good fiduciary, approach to managing risk, as opposed to just being reactionary. So I think that's a really big piece of this. And then we need the EP industry to really professionalize. We need to continue to evolve and professionalize, where it's not reactive. It's not about the guns and the radios and the cool guy gear. Like, I loved all that stuff. I did all that. And that was back in the day. But the reality is, we need everybody to evolve. Think about cyber, think about online threats, think about the publicity that's going on right now, and what Brittnee's sharing about the threat environment. I mean, I think these are real things that are developing. And if you don't have an intelligence program, you can't address those.
Absolutely.
So I hate it when tragedy occurs, but it does drive change in our business. And I know there's a lot of good efforts in our industry to advance the professionalism of the agents that are out there working. But if we don't do that, right? So if we don't do that as an industry, we're going to end up back at RFK and Rosie Greer, right? Where they hire the biggest guy they can find. I hope they stand in the way of the threat, but no advance work is done. No intelligence is gathered, and a tragedy happens, and we lose a leader back in the day. I don't want our business to revert to being bodyguards. I never wanted that. I always wanted it to be proactive and evolving in the right way. The future of EP is in protective intelligence and really good advanced work.
Absolutely.
Sorry, it's not AI doing analysis. They can't get it. They cannot do it effectively.
Right.
But it's about trained human analysts doing the work of assessing all the information to ascertain the threat, and then do all that based on solid analytical tradecraft. That's the key for our EP programs going forward.
Well said. Brittnee, you live and breathe in Dallas, Texas, and that place is nuts. It's like exploded. When I was there, I was like, Plano, Frisco, everything's going on down there in development reminds me of like a new Dubai in the U.S., but in Dallas.
Yes.
Texas. Any feedback on what you're seeing and experienced in your lifetime there? It's just out of control.
It's just growing so fast. It's insane. I moved here about 7 years ago from a small country town, and it's insane how much it's grown. I really like it. There's just a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different perspectives and mentalities, and it's just not too bad. I mean,
what's the native Texans thinking about it all? That grew up there, that lived on a farm, had a truck with longhorns in the front of the truck, driving down the farmland, and
what they think about the
crazy growth of all these companies moving in, big corporations coming in, building these massive glass towers.
I think we're all kind of on the same page about that. I mean, that's kind of my like what I was saying. My generation, and even like my younger brother, he's stayed in the country town. We talk about this, and he's got a different perspective because he didn't. He's stayed where he's at, small town country boy, and it's just. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat.
You guys feel like you're getting pushed out of what used to know, and just the small town atmosphere is changing. You got these big corporations moving in. It's changing cost of living, it's changing the traffic.
Yeah. I mean, everything is different. Like even in my small country town, like my first apartment, not even that long ago, I was 18 and it was $400. Now it's what, 900, and they haven't been updated. They're crappy, and they were crappy when I lived in them, like,
Yeah.
it's
You guys are getting pushed out. Middle class.
Yeah, the companies, the apartments aren't updating the apartment buildings. They're gross. Most of them are gross. And it's just like you're paying so much for just nothing. Yeah.
Got it. Cost of living gets worse. Doesn't change much. It's just the more stresses of that big city growth. Hey, go ahead, Brittnee.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. That's pretty much my take on it. I mean,
got it. Fair enough. Kris, bring you back in on this. You're fully aware of what's happening in Dallas and the growth that's exploding. I think with the growth, migration leads to more people. More people creates, the crime element is going to explode. I think I see it happening in the next 5 years. That's why we got licensed there. I just see, I don't want to say it, but I'll shoot straight. Dallas will have LA problems in the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, we're running into a lot of issues in urban environments, Dallas being one of the faster growing areas in the country. I'll also highlight Southwest Florida. They're projecting Southwest Florida will be similar size to the eastern coast of Florida within a decade. I mean, think about that. The bustle of Miami happening in the small town of Naples, right? So that's going to be crazy kind of growth in an environment. And the challenge there is the infrastructure can't handle it. You've got, the both sides of the polarity of the social economics, spectrum. People, wanting to move there, bringing affluence to those sites, the restaurants that come with it, right? The nightclubs, all the wealthy, affluent neighborhoods. And then you got the people that need to work in those areas to support those.
Yeah.
And those are two different areas. We see that in Jackson Hole, we see that in Aspen, we see that in Naples now in some instances. And so those create friction. Those environments create friction. And then you got any mechanism whatsoever for interstate drug trafficking, the ability for gangs to move in and out of areas like that. I mean, change drives risk.
Absolutely.
And that's a really important thing for everybody to really think about. So, well, what does that mean? Well, change drives risk. That's three words that have a lot of impact. As people experience change, whether it's in a CEO's life, right? Or if it's in an everyday person's life that's going to work every day. If there's change, like Brittnee, you said you're a mom, right? So your life changed when you had your child. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the CEO, right? Same thing when you move to a new area, your life changes, and then that creates risk. Now you have concerns about your child. Makes total sense. What happens when you get into a certain geography, like Dallas, like with all the growth, that change brings in risk. So when all those people move there and all those businesses open, it's not just the Brittnees and the Mark Ledlows that say opportunity. We should go into this area and find a better life. The bad guys do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Right? So criminal enterprise sees that as change creating opportunity. Right? So risk and opportunity, those kind of also both sides of the same coin. So you invite these new environments. These new environments invite criminal organizations and opportunity to take advantage of that risk that Brittnee now identified, or Mark's identified. He's going to move in there and do more services. So what I think for me, that is all true. But when you have an event like UHC, it amplifies that, right? So now it's amplified in social media. It's amplified because of Gen Z's perception. It's amplified, and valid or not, right? It is. It's your perception. It's amplified. And it's the same thing on the corporation side. It's amplified for them. It's why Mark's getting calls and Red 5's getting calls. And a lot of our companies are getting calls to deal with this risk. And so it's fascinating. And corporate leaders and protective intelligence operations need to listen to Gen Z and need to listen to what's being said in society about what's happening on the street. That is intelligence. Intelligence should drive the threat profiles, which then creates, hopefully, a better risk management situation.
Right.
Kris, you have such a good way with words. You get the gift.
Yeah, that was good.
Wow.
Well, there's a lot of teaching coming out there.
Well, for the audience that don't know who you are, Kris, I mean, you've done SWAT instruction and worked in the CIA, and you've done some pretty crazy, wild stuff.
Yeah, I was so fortunate to work, at CIA coming out of college, during protective operations. Loved that, getting involved in, intelligence operations and traveling around the world with them, working with so many different cultures, experiencing what they think is important, right? Sharing what we think is important. And just did that. I did that for, I guess it was about a decade. And then I spent some time with the FBI as a special agent in San Francisco. And again, another group of fantastic people really trying to make things better. And I was fortunate to work on a couple of major events. We did, Salt Lake Olympics. I was on the SWAT team. We worked on a variety of different challenges, operations, large operations. 9/11 happened when I was at FBI. So that was a big significant emotional event in our organization as everybody responded to that tragedy. But yeah, I've been able to take all those experiences, right? And I like to think, use them in context with the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And what that's allowed Red 5 to do is to be very agile, respond to clients' needs with creative solutions, not just going to throw, 5 guys in Suburban and you're going to be fine. Like that's just not me, right? Sometimes that's what you need to do. But we always want our operations and our services to be very well informed by intelligence, informed by, perspectives like Brittnee has, informed by Mark with the work you do. Like we talk, like that's industry intelligence, right? That's, hey, we're seeing this, we're hearing this. And talking and listening is really how you gather intelligence, asking good questions. And so as we've done that, I've been fortunate enough to have some time to write the book, Your Resiliency. And I've had the time to work with such amazing clients that we have. The employees of Red 5 are absolutely killer. We do so much to screen them. We do so much to pick the right people, and they do the great work that they do every day. And so I'm very grateful for all their inputs. And I hope we get a chance to continue to provide services, into the next 20 years. As you know, Mark, we just did our 20th anniversary. So, I cannot believe that we've been doing this for 20 years. It's insane.
I got the 20-year coin too, and we got a picture on LinkedIn with Kris and I together in
That's right.
office in Virginia. So shout out to Kris and his team for 20 years is not easy. I mean, we just hit our 5-year, and everybody said, "Mark, where's your challenge point?" Like, oh yeah, we probably got to get a challenge point. After they see they saw your cool coin on LinkedIn, Kris. So I'm like,
oh, there you go. Now at the bar, Mark, you're gonna have to do something.
I've got to do something for their 5th year anniversary, but it's the awesome thing we do in the industry, Brittnee. We exchange coins. It's basically some memento in the industry, and you get a coin from somebody. I mean, they just appreciate you. And
that is so sweet. I like that. That's sweet.
So we give each other coins, and then we take pictures with each other, like for LinkedIn professionally, and it's just it tells the industry that, hey, we work together, and this is the trusted, credible person. And it just helps us in the industry. And it's kind of the silly things that we do in this business.
No, that's nice.
Lots of silly things. Lots of silly things.
Like, Kris and I met Kris in Beverly Hills, 5 years ago? Something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, Trot just sent me the Wheels Up party photo.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen that a long time.
40 people on that detail. Most women of any detail in that year, I think it was. Like that.
That would not surprise me. Yeah.
And then you had, it was basically a royal family from the Middle East, Brittnee, and we got to go to Disneyland on the client's time. That was kind of fun, but we weren't playing. We had to work. So that was the unfun part of it. It was hot. But I learned more about my industry in that 3-month period than I ever have in my whole entire career, because you had Kris, his company leading it. And so you have some of the most brilliant minds in the business by your side.
Yeah, I bet you have to be able to come up with all of that to protect somebody. It takes a lot.
Complicated.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. Personalities, logistics, politics.
Hey, I work with people every day. I can only imagine.
Yes, you do. You know exactly what we're talking about.
And our good friend Mike Trott, he actually wrote a book and then put that experience in the book of what we did without going into too much detail. So shout out to Mike Trott's book, The Protected. If you haven't seen that book, check it out. Actually, Mike Trott was my first podcast guest on the show 5 years ago. So thanks, Mike, for your help in launching this thing 5 years ago. I didn't know what I was doing at a legal pad, and I was like freaking nervous. I was like, what am I doing? Like, podcast thing? But now here we are 5 years later, talking about a shooting. And we have a Brittnee cuts hair for a living, and she's telling me the story, and now she's on a podcast. So, you just got to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
To take risk.
Crazy how life works.
Yeah. No, it is crazy.
And Kris running his 20-year-old company in Virginia, and got to take a tour of his offices. They're like, whoa, this is legit.
Good to know we're legit. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Like a freaking, like a GSOC command center for the CIA. Well done. Really well designed and all that. I was taking pictures, of course, and said, don't post that. I'm like, yeah, that's the trademark stuff. Okay. Protect his business interest.
Can't be doing all that. You share the secret sauce, man.
That is the secret sauce. Trademark stuff. Can't be giving away secrecies. But I had to share with my team, hey, this is what Kris is doing at Red 5. They go, it was motivation for my team.
Sure. This
is the level, you want to aim for, but this is the professionalism of our partner. And just knowing who Kris is and having worked with him, and, he has severe credibility in the business, and talk about, the shooting with the CEO of United Healthcare.
And I feel like that's really important, like getting his perspective and insight, because, we only know what the normal, basic, general public feels, so it's nice to see the other side, and besides the CEOs like freaking out, like to hear like what's actually going on behind the scenes and like stuff like that. So it's good.
Yeah, the thought process, Kris, is why didn't he have security? What's he doing without security? And I'm not going to be a second string quarterback on the bench there, but he probably just didn't want it. Maybe he wasn't mandated by the shareholders to have it. I don't know.
Yeah, I can imagine there's a number of investigations that are underway, and not to mention just the one in New York, right? But
of course,
I'm sure there's a lot of internal stuff that's happening. There, I you can comment, and there's all kinds of people commenting on social media about that stuff, and frankly, where we just land is, corporations need to provide it. CEOs may not want it, or may want it, and you got to figure out a way to protect them. The board has a fiduciary interest in leaning in on that, making sure that corporations are doing what they're supposed to. Families have it tough. They got to deal with all the intrusiveness. They got to deal with the challenges that the threats create in and of themselves. And it's not pleasant. As much as people go, oh, they got this detail and they're running around town like, oh, how cool is that? I'm like, it is not cool. It is not fun. Mark can speak to it. I can speak to it. It's a ton of work.
It is.
And when they really want to hurt you, it gets really stressful really quick. And, I've been in those environments overseas, and it does leave a longer term mark on you as having done that work for so long. So you got to learn to manage the stress. But yeah, it's a crazy situation, and corporations have a lot to deal with right now. And they need people to help them, to give them good objective answers. And then hopefully they're getting good advice, for public relations and product value and creation. And so that it's not just maybe the shareholders that are benefiting, but it's also the customers.
Well,
It's a tough conundrum to work through.
It is. So, Brittnee, I'm going to ask you for your New Year's resolution for 2025. What's the advice you give your generation after you matured and your mom working hard? What's the advice after this podcast that you can give the audience that might take a lot of positive outlook on the new year?
So what? You may fall 7 times, but get up 8. Don't give up. Don't give up. Eventually, it'll stick. Just keep going. Keep pushing. Keep going. Eventually, you'll make it.
Well done. Like it. Your turn, Kris.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, I mean, mine is very similar. I like the don't give up. That's always a mantra. Find a way to improve resiliency every day. Like there's a way to learn from what's happened. There's a way to demonstrate what you've learned, put it into practice, and I think that's really critical. Gen Z, I hear Brittnee, people, share stories like this and share their stories of challenges. And I just keep saying, you can be more resilient if you came into this world and you found yourself in a position where you just don't feel strong, you just don't feel like you can make it through. There are things you can change. You can choose to be stronger. You can choose to be, more resilient. You can have a greater awareness about your life, right? You can have a greater mindset about positive growth. You can increase your skills. Go get a different, skill. You can increase your fitness. You get up and go for a walk, right? It's just not that hard to increase your fitness. And then relationships are critical. Like if you can find people that'll always support you, lift you up, and enable you to succeed, then you've sort of captured all those elements of resilience: awareness, mindset, fitness, skills, relationships. There you go. That's what you can do in 2025. Not that hard.
Pretty easy. And a shout out to Kris's book, Resiliency. Is that can they find that book at, Kris?
Yeah, it's Raise Your Resiliency, and you can find it on Amazon.
Okay. And they can find you on LinkedIn as well. That's the only social media thing you have, right? LinkedIn.
That's correct. Yeah, the only public one. Yep.
How about you, Brittnee? Are you on any social stuff?
I am on Instagram. That's about it.
How do they find you?
It is Brittnee with 3 I's, 2 T's, and a Y, 357.
Okay. And audience, we'll tag you. I'll get your social media stuff. We'll tag you when we post this and all that. So don't worry about that.
Okay.
So we'll do your first podcast on your social. So there'll be many more to come, I'm sure, after this.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for letting me speak. I really appreciate it. I'm glad. I feel like this was needed.
Yeah, you had a lot to add, a lot of value to add to this conversation. Just sitting there in the chair at the barbershop, they're like, whoa, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to pull Kris in and talk about this too. Just get 2 different perspectives.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
And I think the industry needs this right now because everybody's like overreacting. And of course, someone got killed, so not really overreacting. It's got to protect your sweet. So I think Kris really dialed in on that side of the house. And then, of course, Brittnee, you did double down on how people really feel and think out there in the generation. And we definitely got to do our verification of our information, like Kris talked about, and really look into that more. But yeah, this is a great conversation, and I'm glad we were able to pull it off with Kris's help. Kris Decker, my podcast producer of the Fearless Mindset podcast. And so this is our first episode of the year. I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. Change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have an open conversation. Brittnee, it's great to hear what you have to say, and I appreciate you sharing all that.
Yes, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
You as well. Mark, thanks so much for having me.
You bet, buddy. You bet. You are a very credible wealth of information. You've done some stuff around the world, and it's great having your friendship and mentorship and all your advice and the talks we've had over the years, and
absolutely
many more, I'm sure. And Brittnee, just thanks for your time, and have a great day in Dallas there. And I'll be dropping in. I'm sure we'll be staying in touch here in the future, and we'll publish your social media on the notes so people can find you too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark.
You got it, Brittnee. We'll see you soon. And Kris, thanks for your time, brother. Appreciate you.
My pleasure.